This is the Ultimate Office project for environments and exhibit design here at BSU. I'm Gabrielle Winterlin, and let's begin. So the mission for this project was to create the ultimate office space. This office should be reasonable in size with no more than 5 people that work in the space. For the vision, for me, offices oftentimes have this negative connotation. They're viewed as boring. They have little value when you say that you work at one. The vision for this is to create a space that is unlike any other office spacing today. This space should wow the user every time they enter and transport them to another world. There should be a sense of community and a chance for cooperation throughout the space as well. And I think this is very important, being able to communicate and create a relationship with other employees or potential clients coming in. Despite there being a hierarchy in staff, everyone will play an important role and can communicate easily with one another throughout the space. And again, that's very important in creating this cohesive, almost community throughout. So because of this, my theme that I chose is Rise Up as One. This is the idea of everyone coming together, working on maybe individual aspects of the project, but in the end, we're going to have this one thing that's we're proud of and can show off. And this is what I think the bond throughout this whole space should be. For my design style, I chose Gothic Revival. Here's some examples of what that generally looks like. So you can see there's a lot of pointed arches or spires that you see throughout it, and some of the materials that go along with that are your darker woods, stone walls, iron, and a lot of this seems really like heavy, dark, almost dungeon feeling at times, but it's really easy to alleviate some of that if you implement really good lighting. So having warm lights, fireplaces could be included that create some of that warm lighting. Adding aspects of color, so vibrant tapestries, stained glass windows are seen a lot in Gothic styled buildings, and they also can create some of that light and color to help break up some of that heaviness that the materials are used. So this is some of the things that I'm trying to keep in mind when going through this design process. For my inspiration, I looked towards Eugene Violet de Ledoux. Probably butchered his name, sorry. He was a French Gothic Revival architect, and he had a lot of that stuff that you see in Gothic Revival. He had the arches and the spires, and he really had, a lot of his works had that large decorative window, which I would love to implement into this design. And also be mindful that a lot of this Gothic Revival stuff is architectural things versus interior design. So when we move on here to the design strategy, I'm looking for some of the furniture to mimic what is seen in those architectural exterior buildings and then bring them into this interior. So a lot of these chairs have that spire, that arc that you see on the outside of these buildings. So bringing them into this building will help convey that style that I'm going for without having to have the whole building be this massive castle or cathedral sort of looking thing. So having decorations like that for the desks, the tables, the chairs. Keep in mind the materials that we're looking for. So having wooded furniture, stone walls, order stone flooring, and being able to include some sort of color, so tapestry or the idea of a stained glass window or something along those lines. So here's my logo for the company Dragon Designs, which is the office space that that we designed. For the pattern for this logo and the space, I chose this off-centered, continuous, like bricklaying pattern, and that'll be incorporated both in the logo, as you can see here, where it almost looks like the top of a castle, but also having stone walls in the design as well will continue on that pattern and combine both the physical aspects of this design along with the logo. The colors here are both colors from the logo or seen throughout the office space as well. And some of the materials, so including the wood, the iron, the stone that we talked about earlier. The song that I chose that I think conveys this space the best is the 2008 Merlin's theme. It's instrumental, but it's got this sense of both whimsy and this strong, like, driving force. So those are things that I've mentioned before, my vision that I'm looking for. Just having this unique, maybe almost like playfulness to the space, as well as having just this backbone, this driving factor of everyone coming together and pushing through. So for that reason, that's why I chose that song for this design. Here's one of my initial renders for this space. There's a couple changes that I've made since this initial render. This one just ended up being the best one that really gets that overall general feel of what the space is going to look and feel like. So one of the big aspects in design for me is being able to understand your client and what this space or whatever you're designing should look like. What should it feel? What's the message being conveyed? Easily enough with this project, I am my own client, so I have the best understanding of what I want this place to look like and what I want this feeling to be. And so that's a huge step that was made easier just because of the constraints of what this project is. Some of the problems that we're looking to fix that were mentioned in my vision, creating a unique space and this idea of community. Going with the Gothic revival and a medieval theme are the first steps in this ideation process and problem solving. So being able to create a dramatic and grand scheme or idea or theme going throughout the whole place helps create that community or coherentness throughout the space and unifying it all. With the development process, this whole presentation that I'm giving is a lot of those first steps and creating a fully fledged development that could be implemented in the real world. Obviously this one will not be, but having that idea leading up to that point, so including certain things like everything from like light fixtures and understanding what the technology is going to look like throughout the space and the function and presentation that will convey the feeling of what you want the space to be like. So here's the general dimensions of what this room is going to look like. So it's a circular space, so it's going to have a 50-foot diameter with ceilings going up to 25 feet tall. So ideally this space will be generous to monumental on scale. This is going to give this space this feeling of a castle or cathedral that we're looking for. And it allows us, it being so open, allows users to move about freely in a more open working environment. There's also this separate area in the back, which I'll talk about its function in a little bit, but that one, it's got a 10-foot height. This is roughly the size of a normal room going into it, so the idea of having this room within this space is also important to note. As I mentioned before, as you can see, this space is circular, and did that because it creates a more memorable atmosphere, as well as creating this strong central focal point. So having a circular room, even if you don't notice it necessarily, I mean, you'll notice it's circular, but not noticing its impact when you go into it. But it being a circular room automatically puts this idea of having a unique space. It's not a basic rectangular room or square room going in. And again, creating that strong central focal point and that movement around that space is also something that's really important. So having that circular form of a space, creating that core and just initially having a unique looking space is all things that help lead up for my vision of the space. So here's kind of what some of those aspects are going to look like for different areas in the space. So initially we've got this desk space in the beginning of the room where you come in, and off to the sides, on both sides, we have workspaces. So having this whole area full of workspaces leading up into this private section of the room as well. These are talking about these adjoining spaces, including this private meeting space and the restrooms. They have this direct connection with the main area. Despite being a separate room in there, they still have this direct doorway that leads from this space to this other space, and allowing it easy access and moving to and from these two. They are divided in two, so there's not a direct connection. There's only an offside connection between the meeting space and the restrooms, and there's not really a strong enough relationship between these two smaller rooms to really create a direct connection between them. They are important to the whole space as a whole, so that's why they have a direct connection with those, but not with each other. Circular spaces, I found, also should reduce the feeling of being boxed in or contained or having that strong enclosure space, which is something that I'm looking to reduce in this office space compared to other office spaces. So that's another reason that I found a circular room can help lead to that. The definition of these spaces, some of them obviously are more defined than others. Starting with the desk space in the front of the room here, it's defined by just this rug. The rug both adds character and color to the room, but more importantly, it contains guests or people coming into here. The permeability of the space is really high between the workspaces and coming in. So coming in, you can still get this feeling of being in this open area, but there's still this like mental containment to stay in this front area where this greeting desk is, which is important for the traffic flow and understanding the difference in relationships between a guest in this space or a usual employee or the main user of this. On the flip side, we have this back room that we talked about. Now these two more private areas, the meeting room on one side and the restrooms on the other side, they have a very strongly defined brick wall door sort of containment for them, and that's because these are private areas. So you're gonna limit the permeability of getting in and out of that. So I think it was important to be able to have a relationship where you can have everything still be open, but there's always going to be that next level of containment that are needed throughout the space. And that's important for a circular room as well, because unlike a more square rectangular room where you can just box off areas with walls, it's a little bit more difficult to do that in a circular space without wasting too much space. So I think creating it in this way creates both high permeability open areas as well as having private contained areas as well. So moving on with the texture of the space, going back to kind of those materials I mentioned earlier, the iron, the stone, and the wood. And a lot of that can be used to create texture. So the walls here are very textured. They're rough and non-flush stone walls, and this is not only going to help fill in the open space, but the texture keeps the space looking interesting and stuff moving kind of in and out of the walls. It's also, because it's stone, it helps it keep it looking clean other than looking cluttered. So it's a way to create texture both visually and physically with it still keeping clean. And a big one is also the stone floors. So stone floors are slightly textured, maybe more so visually than physically, in comparison to the walls. So it's almost going to have the same idea of like if you had carpet, where you could have that slight pattern going through, but by keeping this with the stone walls, it stays in line with the design strategy and theme of Gothic revival. But it still has this texture, and it looks clean compared to some other options. Details in furniture can also add texture, so unlike maybe the tables that are in this rendering, but some tables and chairs that can be implemented into the space could be have like carvings or be more detailed if the space still seemed too empty or open. The space being circular in general also has this idea behind it of being smooth. So oftentimes when something's round, it also is viewed as smooth. So that's why a lot of the texture in the walls and in the flooring is going to help alleviate some of that, to give it a more rugged roughness, but still being clean. So trying to find that balance is really important with the textures. Here's some of the people in the space that I was talking about. There's your primary user, which is myself. A lot of my views are similar to what I've mentioned in the vision on what I want the space to be. So the idea of working in an office is a hard one. And so creating this sense of community, creating this whole experience of going into work every day is really important. So being able to use this space in such a way and have that community is important. And on the other side, having people come into that space as well and their reactions to that space. So having a guest or a potential client, in this case, we'll name him Brian, is coming into the space. And maybe he goes to a lot of other companies, other design companies all the time, but going from one to another, they all kind of look the same. I mean, they all have their own unique creativity that they portray, but he would like maybe see a change of pace. So coming in, the idea of hopefully that someone like Brian comes into Dragon Designs and being able to show off this wow factor and this is who we are is important. And so how they're going to come into this space, and so a main user or employee coming into it might only be like mildly aroused by coming in because they come into it every day. So it's different than that initial impact. A lot of this design is just that initial impact. But hopefully with the open workspace and constant activities going through, you can create this sort of excitement of the work area. So having those relationships will help keep it more interesting. Again, like a client on the other hand who's just entered this massive scaled room with a giant stone dragon, like that's going to be a lot more impactful on them for that first time, and just that wow. You're again for pleasure, still being able to, for an employee, being able in that workspace that they want to be in, and that's the vision of this, is to create unique and exciting ways to go to work every day, where the guest is still going to have that, hopefully still have that lift of coming up there. The control of the space also is a lot of the main user or employees are going to have more control over where the guest goes in this space. The room itself isn't as structured as maybe some others do with like hallways and stuff. So it's going to be, you're going to have to create that relationship between the two to be able to guide them throughout the space, need be. So going on to what that experience for both of these people is going to look like. Coming in, we've got both the logo for the space as well as the desk, and that's your initial steps in having that relationship. So coming in, from what I imagine is a general normal sized hallway, you're gonna open these doors and come into this massively scaled room. And this is a huge first impression. This is a huge impact. Just the form and size of this room is going to do that. And from there, you're going to be greeted by a large, sturdy desk and our logo. So that's going to be coming in from whether you're an employee or a potential client or guest coming in. You're going to both have that same kind of approach to coming in. From there, moving on to what you're going to do, or waiting, I guess, there's not going to be a whole lot of waiting time. The idea is hopefully not to have a whole lot of waiting time for a potential client or guest. A employee can just jump into work, walk in, here you are, you're in your workspace, this is where you're at. A client, on the other time, often has this waiting lobby sort of thing. And my idea behind this is that when they come in, there's going to be real people there, and they can have those conversations and just already start making those relationships while they wait for either the meeting room or whoever they're there to talk to. So, as I said before, coming into this space, employee is going to just go off to work. They're gonna go find a table. That's where we're gonna get back into what they were doing before. Potential client, after maybe talking or seeing who's there at the time, they can be escorted to the meeting room or shown the direction of the bathroom should the need arise. And this workspace is open, which means it's allowing whoever enters to get immediate feel of the room and see what employees are working on. So even if the potential client is just there for the meeting room, to get to the meeting room, you're going through this workspace. And coming into this massive thing, people are walking and moving around, and whoever you are, you're going to get the feel of that space. And hopefully it's a positive one. And you can see what people are working on. I think that openness is really important for what I want this, the feeling of this room to be. So side trips, after either being, reaching the front desk, your workspaces, meeting room, going to be your main target spots. Secondary spots are probably just the restroom, like I said. Should the need arise, employees can always escort to a guest or potential client where that would be, which is on the opposite side of the meeting room. So after that, it's leaving the space, and from that you're going to come in, or you're going to go out the same door that you came in. We've got banner of that, of our logo again, just to reinstate that theme, or that final push towards that. Basically walking back and through the space you came. Most of the space is just this giant workspace where everybody's kind of working on their thing. So going from either meeting space, going back to that working, seeing people working, and then eventually leaving back into what I imagine is the hallway you came in from. So another kind of visual of what that's going to look like, traffic flow and walkways in a sense. So on your left here is probably what the general idea of what a main user or employee would be doing, or how they move around the space. So coming in, the big difference I feel is the workspaces. So the workspaces are going to be the main purpose of why the employee is there, and the areas that they're going to have the most focus to, where a guest isn't going to be using that space at all. They're going to walk through it, but they're not going to be utilizing that space like an employee is. Also, on the other hand, the guest is going to be using the conference room maybe more than a normal employee would be using, depending on who the client is seeing. So that's a different, like, the function between those two and how that space is. Side trips being the restroom, as stated earlier, it's important to note where that is and the accessibility of that. The front desk being both one of the first and last things that you see moving around the space before you leave is also important to note. Whether you're working in that space as an employee or you've been greeted or talked to the person who's working at that desk, it's important for both sides of the personas here. So here we have just the general function of the space. Well, it's an office, and it's a workspace for employees and the user. The adjoining areas on it, it's there for meeting areas with potential clients or in-company meetings, and these are going to be your aspects of it's to create relationships between employees and potential clients, and coming back for more ideas, and employee to employee, again, coming up with ideas together and creating this sort of community where everybody is together working on something. So that's what the function of this space should be, is we're going to get work done, and while we're at it, we're going to create these relationships to create the best work and the best projects that we can. So here's another view of kind of going back to that grid of that space. So in creating that function that I just mentioned, the arrival space here serves as a functional center for information or assistance to either employees or potential clients. This is also a limited workspace. So this is your first point at which you're going to be creating those relationships that I talked about, and communication between everybody. The table workspaces on either side serve as a large domain for fulfilling the main function of this goal, which is to get work and projects done. The conference room is another notable destination. This is the main area for the clients and guests, as I mentioned before. This is where they're going to be going a lot of the time if they come. The restrooms accessibility should also be observed as a secondary area, and where that is in the layout, and how people of both sides can get to it. Landmarks of the space. I feel landmarks are very important in centralizing people. They're oftentimes symbolic. In this case, put a giant stone statue. So this dragon statue serves as a symbol not only for the logo and the company, but it's visual throughout the entire space, and it's just in the center, creating that centralized idea and just remembrance of the power that everyone has working together. And I think that's really important for this landmark that I was trying to convey. So along with that, the circulation of the space, being able to have the tables and chairs and furniture organized in the space in such a way. So having the workspaces on both sides of the desk, so no matter which side you go on, you're always going to be included in this workspace or this project that's getting done. Coming in, instantly being a part of this group, this community we have, even if you're not there working on stuff, you're in this whole cohesive work area. You can see what's going on. You can get the feel of the room. And that's, again, that just goes back to the vision of creating this community amongst the space, and this relationship that the employees and clients can have together. So basically, coming to the space, you're here to create a relationship, you're here to get work done, and that again goes for both employees and for clients. To create those relationships and to get that work done, we have this space, and oftentimes I feel like there's not enough time to create that sort of feeling. So by creating this space in such a way that you get this big impact of, this is who we are and this is what we're here to get done, and by doing this in such a dramatic way, it saves on time on nothing. This is an impactful space is what the vision is. It's meant to just come in and say, wow, but this is who we are, this is what we stand by, this is the strength that we have working together. So being able to have that feeling as both an employee or a client coming in, you instantly get that. So that saves on the time and the space that we have available to us. The whole space outside of this room, so like the building in itself, it could go both having a grand scale building and having your logo on the title of it creates an image for you, and that itself will create this dramatic impact. But even if you can't have that, this room itself does that for you. It's got everything from that initial change in scale, that impact, and having your logo there and knowing who we are and what we're about. So having that interior compared to exterior thing, so you don't need to have, like I said, like way back before, you don't need this whole building to be a giant castle there, your logo on it. It can be a normal, slightly unique for this room, building coming in and having that's still having that emotion that you want to convey throughout it. So that was my presentation for my office for Dragon Designs. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.